that was such a safe and comfortable place to go visit, no big deal. And now these last several years, no one gets to see anyone. It's rough. But tell us a little bit more about, so did you live inside the city in Damascus, or were you like in the suburbs nearby? Or I feel like as Americans, we don't always have a good picture in our heads of what it would actually be like to live in Syria, especially right now, because we have so many images of ISIS and bombings and all of this craziness. What was it like as a little kid in Damascus or near Damascus? Where were you?
Yeah, Syria is really diverse, and you can really end up going to the suburbs quite quickly. But I always grew up in the city, at least my memories of the city. So I always considered myself a city girl because I left Damascus and then came to Los Angeles County and then spent some time in DC. So I've always been in the city, and remembering Syria and Damascus specifically. I remember living in well-populated areas with a lot of family, a lot of friends and church activities. We would go to shared public pools during the summer and just really enjoy ourselves, being able to play outside, going over to my friends' houses. Of course, more of my memory now is what I can recall from living in Southern California.
Right. Of course. Of course. So so you lived in the city, and I've seen pictures of Aleppo at least, and they are sort of like these before and after pictures, right? Before the war and after the war. And what you see before the war is, I don't want to say a Western city, but very, very secular, very open, women going to universities, walking around, that it was not like sort of a closed Muslim culture, but instead was a very open culture. And from what I understand, Christians, Jews, Muslims, and anyone else, everyone lived together pretty well. Is that accurate to say?
That's absolutely accurate. And that goes with how diverse, as I mentioned, Syria is because of its location in the region, its open borders to the nearby cultures and other Arabic-speaking countries who immigrate there for either work or family. And Syria is a powerhouse in the region. I mean, I studied political science, so from a political science standpoint, it really is a self-sufficient country. It's not afraid to make bold statements and be accepting and have a booming economy. And even though the ruling party is quite ruling now for over a couple decades, they are a Muslim ruling party, the acceptance rate for other minorities and other types of religions is high. There's not a lot of oppression. Of course, we see some political games happening, which is common in the region, I would say, and across the globe, whether it's obvious or not. But in terms of the cultural life, the personal, communal life, it's vibrant, and people are, at least before the war, were very open to being with one another. I remember growing up next to a Muslim family, and we were over at each other's homes every day. I remember growing up celebrating Pascha and Palm Sunday and doing processions in the streets, and the government would make sure that we were able to do that. And for the Feast of the Cross, we would celebrate with fireworks on rooftops, and we would process with the cross all over the city. That's unheard of and uncommon, and almost to the now maybe even not practiced. I can't say exactly what they're able to do now with since the Arab Spring and with the growing changes politically happening in the region.
That's right. Yeah, I think things are very different now, and it's such a shame because over the years I've always heard so many beautiful things about Syria, and really, honestly, I thought that I would probably visit sometime in the near future, and then, now that's not going to be possible for a while. But God willing, it'll all come back at some point.
God willing, yes.
So when your family left, though, things were still good in Syria. You weren't like fleeing some kind of chaos or difficulty or violence. You were just moving from one peaceful country to another. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Thankfully, we were able to leave on good terms. The country was in a great place. The saddest thing really was leaving family, which broke me because I didn't know what I was doing as a 8.5-year old, leaving everything I knew to this new country, not knowing the language, not understanding what was happening, why I was getting on a plane. And of course, in the beginning, it could be fun because it's a new experience, but suddenly you realize everything's changing. And if I can recall, it was somewhat traumatic. As much as the changes kept coming, the assimilation process was also difficult. And thinking that I just wanted to go back home and be with my friends and where I was accepted and where I spoke the language. So, of course, everyone who immigrates deals with these types of challenges. But coming from Syria and during a time of peace definitely makes it easier to assimilate because you're not fleeing persecution and you have the choice to go back. But of course, those that are displaced, whether enforced displacement or decide to flee because of persecution, they don't often have the ability to go back, nor are they welcome back. And that must be very difficult. So just wanted to echo the
Right.
experiences of refugees and those that are not in their homelands today and truly wish to be there.
Right. It's a very different thing. It's, and it's interesting too. I wonder when you say that you came over from Syria, do people assume that you were fleeing persecution and that there was all kinds of difficulty? Or do people recognize? I don't know if Americans are even really aware that Syria was such a peaceful and stable and good place for so long.
It's funny that you bring that up because before the war, before the current conflict, I don't know, some people wouldn't call it a war, but before the current conflict, when I would say that I am from Syria, people would say, "Oh, Siberia?" Like that's the extent of that's the extent of ignorance, especially
Right.
for those who don't even know Orthodoxy. They have no idea about any part of the Middle East other than Israel, right? And let's just be
Hmm.
frank, that's a large population of people who are
Yeah.
not or who are ill-informed politically speaking and just need to look at a map, but that's beside the point here. When I would talk about the fact that I'm Syrian, the other assumption is, oh, so you're Muslim. And it's like, no, I'm wearing my cross. I mean, I don't know how you don't see that. And so that's the other part of it. But yes, of course, the third part of that is the political aspect. If you don't know the region, you don't know the people, you don't know their religion, you don't know their politics. And the politics, from a pluralistic standpoint, is a peaceful one. It was a peaceful one, and I hope remains to be a peaceful one. Of course, you with intermeddling and violence within and violence being enforced from outside regions, it's hard to say now how peaceful Syria can be, but the analysis that people had back before the conflict was minimal, I would say. Not a lot of people knew much about Syria, but of course, a lot of people I was engaging too were political scientists, and so that was a little bit of an easier conversation. But by and large, I would say complete blank would
Yeah.
draw on their faces.
Well, and I think that makes sense to me. I think a lot of Americans are not great with geography, to put it mildly, and that as Orthodox people, whenever we discuss different things that are going on in the Middle East or even in Egypt or Ethiopia or somewhere, people have no idea that there are Christians there. Like Americans somehow have a big disconnect between the Bible taking place there and then what happens there today. It's like it's two different worlds and they can't like connect them and see how they're connected other than obviously Jerusalem. But, I think that it doesn't occur to people.
Exactly.
And when you say Damascus, I don't know if everybody sort of recognizes, oh, the road to Damascus, like this is the place Paul was going. He was,
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
don't, I don't know that everybody connects that to modern day Syria. So it's kind of a funny
No.
thing.
Or
It's
even
funny.
Antioch for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you came over, you didn't speak English. You're 8. I'm really curious about your experience coming here because it's different, right? When you come over as an adult, you've made a decision, unless you're fleeing and then you're, sort of making decisions without as much control. But for your parents, it was a different experience than it was for you, right? Because they're evaluating it and deciding that going to America seems like a good idea. They're coming across, they know they can picture in a certain way what they're going to be doing. They're going to try to work, they're going to take care of their kids, get a house, whatever. As an 8-year-old, you really have no control. And I think it would be so much harder to envision it. Like your parents probably had a better idea of what it was going to be like in California than you did. So when you got here, did you rely a lot on a Syrian community? Did you have a lot of Syrian friends that you could kind of plug into? Or did you really just feel adrift in a totally foreign country?
It's interesting that you phrase the question that way, because I want to say yes to both of those. Thankfully, my family had the foresight of immigrating to an existing community in Southern California that was predominantly Arabic speaking. And actually, a lot of them were Syrian or Lebanese. And that's, I think, how a lot of people immigrate. They want to go to a place where it's still somewhat common to them. It's still somewhat familiar. And that's why a lot of people flock to churches as the first place they go to meet people. And for us, of course, we had the church. But in addition to that, our residential home that we stayed in for, I think the first year we stayed with my grandma, and that's where she lived. She lived in a city with pretty much everyone on her street spoke Arabic. And some of them were even from our old hometown who grew up with my family. So it almost felt like we were back in Syria, but in this new US location. But of course, that quickly wasn't evident in my life, because as I assimilated or tried to assimilate in school, I realized that I was no longer the sociable, popular girl that everyone talked to. I was struggling to understand what my identity is. I was struggling with the language. I did excel in school, and I think that I kept that up because I love education, and I love continuing to grow in that aspect. But when I was in school, the language barrier was really difficult, so I didn't really grow as much as I wanted to until I got to high school. But I vividly remember when I started school in third grade in the US, my teacher, I still love her, and I've stayed in touch with her. She was extremely supportive and worked well with me and the other ESL teachers to achieve as much as I could. And that was, I think, the only time I got student of the month. It was the first like 3 to 6 months when I was there. I started reading and writing English very quickly, and the first little book that I wrote from right to left in English. And my professors and teachers thought that was hilarious, because I was writing in English, but it was still the way I wanted to in Arabic. So that's very funny, and a beautiful
That's so
memory
cool.
that I treasure.
Do you still have that book? Out
I
of
think I
curiosity.
do. Yes, my
That would
mom
be
must
something
have
to hold
must
on
have
to.
kept it. Yeah, I think my mom must have kept it.
That would be something to hold on to. That's very beautiful. It's sort of like a visual manifestation of the changes that you're going through, right? That there's a certain amount of Arabic, there's a certain amount of Syria that you can't get out of you, but then there's this English coming in as well. I love that.
Exactly right. Yeah,
I want to
it's
remind
really
our
profound.
It is. It really is a profound, profound thing. And it's, I think we sort of assume, oh, kids are sponges. They pick up language so easily. And kids I mean, you probably picked up English a lot faster than an 85-year-old woman would have picked up English. But that doesn't mean it's easy, right? I mean, you're talking about 6 years before you got 6 years of school before you went to high school. And it wasn't really until high school that you felt really comfortable in it and that you could start reaching out. That's a long time. That's a
Yeah.
long time to feel, in between and not know exactly who you are. That's
And the
difficult.
cultural element too, just identity politics and understanding the peer pressure, and the fact that now I live in an even more diverse culture with people I'd never seen before from other countries and other religions and other values. And then on top of that, my parents trying to maintain Syrian Orthodox traditional values within the home, and not really understanding why, let's say I was asking to go to a school event or to hang out with another friend. And so their parenting style had to shift as well. And it was a growing process for all of us, but I'm thankful for them and always will be, because being here has brought me so much joy, being in the US and being who I am in light of their efforts.
That's beautiful. It is funny as a parent. So before I had kids, I used to get frustrated when I would see this because, you have an immigrant family, parents come over, they bring the kids, and then it's like they're trying to recreate the homeland in the house. And you're like, no, 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 you brought them here. If you wanted Syria, stay in Syria. What are you doing? But it's, become, not so much that the parents need to change. I was thinking at the time, but that they need to allow their kids to grow in the culture where they've planted them, right? But as a parent, I have such a different view of it now because there is so much fear of just messing up in the first place. It is so hard to parent kids, even in your home culture, that adding that complication to it sounds almost paralyzing. Like it just sounds terrifying. So, God bless your parents because it sounds
there
like
were a
they
lot
did
of
well.
growing pains.
Oh, I
Yes.
bet. I bet. Do you have funny stories about like when you talk about being raised as a Syrian American girl? Do you have funny
Yeah.
stories about your parents that you tell? Are there any
Oh,
you can tell on here?
I think I can tell a few. I think my mom is listening right now, so shout out to her. But uh, Halloween was always such a weird thing in our family because it's like no resemblance to anything we've ever done. I think maybe it slightly resembles the Feast of Saint Barbara, where in Syria we would sort of dress up to show how she dressed up to disguise herself as she fled persecution. So it's a really fascinating tradition that we have there. But in the US, dressing up in these really weird costumes and going to people's houses. And all I could tell my mom was candy, candy, mommy, candy, because it's all I wanted. And so she would just always tell me, like, now you have this whole pillowcase full of candy. What are you going to do with that? So it's just such an odd celebration. But of course, they tried to make it as happy as possible.
That's
Um,
excellent.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just it's wonderful. And then there's other times when in high school and I'd asked to go to dances and things like this, and my parents had no idea like why that was even necessary. And I was like, can't you just hang out here at home and watch some TV and listen to some music? It's like, no, this is prom. It's like completely different than that. So really beautiful. They're lovely, simple, and protective and loving parents. And of course, the cultural aspect really challenges their parenting. And I believe that other immigrant parents go through very similar challenges.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. And even when Americans move abroad, right? It's the same thing. It's not that American culture is so weird. It's that trying to raise your kids in a foreign culture is very strange. And the kids, I feel like kids get kind of an inside view to the new culture faster because you're thrown into school. That culture is so intense, and you're at an age where you're working on your identity already. I mean, honestly, middle school is bad enough without trying
Hmm.
to worry about language and cultural differences, right? But for adults, they can insulate themselves a little bit better, right? And they just go to work and maybe they have a job where they don't have to talk to a lot of people. Kids are like thrown into it. And
Yeah.
God bless you. That does not sound easy.
Thank God he did protect me throughout of it, but it wasn't easy at all. I have my fair share of moments that I regret and growing pains that still hurt till today. And the whole challenge and journey of defining your identity within the overarching and overwhelming peer pressure that is the United States public school system. And even the private school system has its own share of pressures, but you're talking about so much that blends and occurs and mixes and influences It's beautiful, the diversity, don't get me wrong, but in a homogenous society or a collectivistic society like Syria, you're still somewhat protected, one would say, by a lot of the cultural values and expectations. Some of that is just a result of like social shaming, if you do something wrong. And so you try and stay within the boundaries as you are in school. Your teachers are respected. You stand up when the principal walks in the room. Like, in the United States, that's unheard of. Like, nobody would ever do that for any reason other than maybe a very, very traditional private school where their values are, set on that kind of thing.
Right.
But
You
it
you
was just
picture
very
it like in a
difficult.
movie at maybe a British boarding school or something, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's just not something that American kids do, just
No, not at
but
all.
it's a good habit, right? Because it instills that respect in you. And it's, there are positives and negatives, right? As you said, there's a certain amount of social shaming. This can be good to keep you in line and keep you safe. This can also be awful and terribly damaging. It's just all societies are like that. We go too far one way or the other all the time.
And I found myself being in that place where I see both sides of the coin, which is what drew me to political science, what drew me to, and as I'll probably share later, working on human rights issues that and government, and understanding how the law works and how it affects social policy and social behavior. And things like social shaming, could be a horrific thing in other countries because it leads to forced marriage and female genital mutilation and honor killings. While on the other hand, it encourages chastity, humility, and modesty. So it's
Right.
like, I don't know what to do with that, but how can we reconcile that? And of course, in the U.S., we have a different governmental system that encourages good behavior and deterrence in the law and things like this to establish a social fabric and a moral compass that the nation can get behind. But the social shaming in the Middle East is a huge part of the agenda to get social behavior results that are in compliance with a lot of the religious values, but also to motivate and get political results to occur as well.
Absolutely. You put that so beautifully that I think we should stop for a second. That's so nice. I just feel like we should leave that right there because that's beautiful. So we will be right back. We're going to take a short break. I do want to remind our audience, if you would like to join this conversation, you're welcome. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Chat rooms open at ancientfaith.com/radio/live. And we will be right back with Noelle Bryce.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
My name is Joseph Clark. I am a seminarian, and I met my fiance at orthodoxandsingle.com.
My name is Deacon Adam Roberts from the Go Forth podcast on Ancient Faith Radio. I started Orthodox and Single in 2016 with a desire to help our neglected singles. Since then, we have celebrated over 30 wedding engagements and receive over 200 new members every month. Orthodox and Single is a proud supporter of Ancient Faith Radio. That's orthodoxandsingle.com. Once again, the website is orthodoxandsingle.com. And as always, it is free to join and browse.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We are here with Noelle Bryce, who is a very eloquent and wonderful young woman, Noelle, if I do say so. But she grew up in California after moving from Damascus. So we've been talking about that kind of culture shock and shift when an 8-year-old comes from Syria into California and learns a whole new culture. And so, Noelle, you mentioned that things got a little better, or that you were a little bolder in high school. How did you decide where you were going to go to college? How did all of this unfold? I know that academically you were doing really well. How did all of that unfold for you?
Yeah, so I decided to stay pretty close to home for college, and much of that was my parents wanting to support me and seeing that it was the best decision for me. So I didn't do a lot of college searching or applying all over the nation, and some of that maybe was just a lack of information, but using my academic success in high school, I was able to get into pretty good colleges in the area and was accepted into the University of Laverne, which was not too far from where I lived at the time. And that's where I went for the next 4 years, studied political science and speech communication.
Excellent. So were you living at home or did you live on campus?
I did live at home. Living on campus would have been a great experience, actually, but I spent so much time on campus it almost felt like I was living on campus, just being involved in so many things. And that's really the way to go for undergraduate studies, and being at a small university, having that small university experience and developing relationships with professors and colleagues that are lifelong relationships that I still value today and develop today. It's really the best way to go. And so living at home was almost good for me, because I still maintained a lot of my familial relationships and had my support system, which was my family and my church. And going into the university, probably spending too much money on room and board was out of reach for me at the time.
Well, it's nice too to have that kind of home base, right? Because I don't know. I found when I was in college, I was in school about 2 hours away from my family. So I lived on campus, but almost every weekend, I really liked to get out of town and go back home, because it's such a bubble, the university, and everyone is in the university and everybody's thinking about academics all the time. And then you can go home and just be a normal person for a minute. And that is kind of a weight off your shoulders, So
Exactly.
I can see how that would be. So you were active in the university, huh? What kind of stuff were you doing?
Yeah, I was really active in the political science department, getting involved in Model United Nations, but then as well, like you said, going back to that home base and realizing, okay, this is who I am. I'm still Syrian, I'm still Orthodox, I'm still a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a female, and so when you're in undergraduate, especially in political science, you're constantly challenged to think of new ways, new philosophies, new theologies. And going back to that home base, realizing that I can bring that home base to the university. And so part of that effort was starting an Orthodox Christian fellowship. And I did that pretty early on, as I got more involved in other clubs and organizations on campus that dealt with social political activism. And starting the OCF chapter was beautiful, because it allowed me to also blend and merge some of my relationships with the local church at the time that was my home. That was maybe just a few miles away from the university, and continually growing in my faith and understanding of orthodoxy, but also of the world and of gender politics, identity politics, activism in all sorts of social and political ways. At the time, really trying to understand as well what it meant to be an immigrant, coming from an immigrant family, and exploring spirituality in new ways, and seeing a lot of my colleagues doing the same thing.
Yeah. It is interesting. Those are fascinating years, the college years, and you kind of get away from home and you start to put your personal experience into this global perspective and try to understand it in all these different lights. It's lovely. So as you're doing this, Did you know that you wanted to go to law school? Is that how you picked political science, or did you kind of not know and just go for it anyway? What was your plan?
Yeah, I knew pretty early on. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be an attorney. In fact, I can trace back my the little seeds of wanting to be at least in the law field back to Syria. Our neighbor was a judge, and she was a female judge, and that was mind blowing to me because it's also unheard of in a large parts of the country for females to be in positions of leadership, let alone positions of authority. That's changed, of course, over the years. But as a child, she's like an idol. She's a superstar to me. And I remember being able to go into her chambers with my mom just to say hi.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was like a huge eye-opening experience. I think they had brought in an individual who was being arraigned at the time, and she, gave some order or some discussed some next steps for that individual's legal ramifications. So just being there as a child and seeing that unfold developed those little seeds in me. And as I grew and pursued education, I realized that, okay, of course, I love science. I love, arts and music and all these other things, but really drawn to that government, community, law, social aspect of what it means to be human and what it means to be alive and in a social contract, so to speak, with the rest of the community. So in high school, as I was preparing to apply to colleges, I knew I wanted to be an attorney, or at least in law. And I remember speaking to a professor who said, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily major in legal studies because you'll do that in law school, major in something
Mm-hmm.
that allows you to be a better reader, writer, and to be able to apply and analyze and synthesize. And so political science was the recommended route, and I loved it because I enjoy those topics, and I come from a background of very politically even savvy family. My dad loves politics, and my grandma's always talking about politics, so it was something that I was exposed to early on, and wanted to continue that as I began to grow in my professional pursuits, knowing that I wanted to go to law school and working towards that during college, and of course ending up applying to law school and attending.
Excellent. That's well, and it feels like you really kind of found your calling and just followed it. And that's a lovely thing. Sometimes we agonize over what our calling is. So it's very beautiful to be able to recognize it early. It's wonderful.
It's a huge blessing.
We had a caller with a question. I'm not sure how to say it. Workena?
Oh, yes.
Called in.
Yes.
Am I saying it right? Is that, yeah. Okay.
Deacon Workena, yes.
Is that who it is? Deacon Workena? Okay.
I believe so.
He actually, if it's him or maybe someone else by the same name, we don't know for sure, but he's having phone problems, but he had a great question. And he's curious because we were talking about the time in Syria and the Syrian culture there when you were there as a child. And he asked, are Middle East Christians a minority population? Like what percentage? Because, when you talk about being in Damascus, you grew up Orthodox and you're in Damascus. It's a historic biblical city, right? Antioch, the first place where Christians were called Christians. How many Christians are there in Syria? Like what kind of percentages are we talking about?
Well, that's a good question. And I think about this question, I think to what that percentage is now as opposed to after or before rather the conflict, the current conflict, because of all the displacement. I mean, half of Syria is displaced, and some of the wealthy were able to leave out of necessity and just relocate in maybe Dubai or Canada or Australia. And some of those Christians, some of those Muslims, I'm not really sure about the numbers, but Christians in Syria have always been a minority as long as I've been alive. So a little over couple decades. But I'd have to get the numbers, but I would say maybe less than 10%.
Yeah.
That would be my guess, but forgive me if I don't have the correct numbers there. And of course that that changes in other parts of the Middle East accordingly,
Mm-hmm.
and in Syria specifically, because of the political climate, it could really range. And I wouldn't know, but I would say dwindling, probably maybe in half now.
I think you're very right. I think that the numbers are dwindling. I actually just, as you were talking, searched it online, and how crazy. In 1920, 25% of the Syrian population was Christian, and then it was down to 10%. So in a century, it went from 25% to 10%, and the truth is now that's the number before the Civil War started. So actually, that was 90 years, 1920 to 2010. You went from 25% to 10%, and who knows what that percentage is now. But I think in general, throughout the Middle East, we're seeing this, that Christians are either having to flee or quietly pack up and move, or they're, just being decimated, unfortunately, in more violent ways. And we're seeing smaller and smaller percentages. But to think that just a century ago, a quarter of Syrians were Christian, it's been a rough century. It really has.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. Lord have
Absolutely.
mercy.
Lord have mercy. But okay, so you've come over now that you're in college. By then, did you feel? You also mentioned actually that because you're with political scientists and stuff, they all kind of know what Syria is.
Yes.
And they know, it's not this same kind of like you're from Siberia thing, but now it's
Right.
like, oh, Syria. Yes, I'm very aware of Damascus. What is your opinion on? Right. So it's like,
Yeah.
So did you feel and how do you feel now? Like, do you feel truly Syrian and American, or are you more one than the other? Like, how do you kind of work that out as a person who came over so young?
Yeah, right now, and for a long time, maybe 8 years or so, I feel fully Syrian American. And I would say even in middle school and high school, as I transitioned into high school, I started using English more as my dominant language and started thinking in English and dreaming in English. And now I do estate planning in English. So it's just like as I grew and learned and progressed in academia as well, you begin to use English, and I began to use English to express myself in political ways as well, and that allowed me to assimilate even more into the society and being immersed in the governmental, sociopolitical pursuits of the country as well, taking ownership of what it means to be American, being proud of being American, and the freedoms and values that we have and that we espouse as Americans, and that we espouse to defend across the globe. Whether people call that intermeddling or defending is a different discussion.
But it depends on the situation sometimes.
Exactly.
I think it's a little of both, right? Like sometimes we're very good about jumping to defense. Sometimes we're just in it,
Yeah.
Whether we need to be or not. But
exactly.
God bless America. We have, we're a wonderful country.
Amen.
We also have something to learn. It's like that's how it is. But
yeah.
So you went to law school. Were you able, you've talked a lot about an interest in government and in politics. Were you doing internships that were sort of government work? Or were you doing human rights work? What kinds of things were you doing throughout your education and then afterwards?
Yeah, in undergraduate, when I was at the University of Laverne here in Southern California, I was involved with an internship doing local government work with the city I was living in at the time. And I was one of the first interns with the mayor, the acting mayor at the time. And in my internship, I was able to shadow the mayor in various meetings across the city and work with other cities. And at the time, water rights are always an issue. But at the time, water was a big issue because there was a huge drought in California.
Yes.
And the mayor was very proactive about wanting to be involved and on the front lines of understanding what the mandates would be moving forward. And in my involvement in city government at the time, I also was very passionate about children's education, and I was passionate about civic education, and So I co-founded, along with the help and support of the mayor and a school board member and a couple other interns, simulated city council meeting, which we call Yes City Gov, and it stands for, it's a really beautiful opportunity, and we were able to pilot the program with the school district there in the third grade. I believe it was third grade or fifth grade. It's leaving me now, but anyways, the program still continues till today, and now those fifth graders are in high school, and they're being the volunteers that run the program, and it's just this beautiful coming together of students, and their families are also involved, and they're learning about civics and engagement, and they're seeing their children taking on simulated council meeting positions and debating whether it's homelessness issues or taxation, or what are we going to do about the trees in downtown.
Oh, that's
It's
great.
just beautiful,
Oh,
wonderful issues.
that is
And then
really
what?
neat. I bet some
Yeah.
of those kids are inspired in the same way that you were when you were able to go into that judge's chambers, right? To be
Oh
able to
goodness,
see,
yes,
the city council sitting in its place, to be able to speak in a group. That's a beautiful thing. That is
yes.
wonderful.
And
So,
so many of them
mhm.
have been moved enough to start wanting to start that on the high school level as well. And at the time we couldn't do it at the high school level because of some of the school board um, gymnastics we would have had to do to incorporate it there. But being able to work with the school board on an elementary level, and having the teachers incorporate that into their curriculum was much easier. But now those students are huge advocates for the program on a high school level, and then they can incorporate that into the existing clubs and organizations that they operate, which works wonderfully. And hopefully other cities as well can follow lead.
Ah, that's wonderful. What a great program. So then you completed law school, right? You passed the
Yep.
bar. How did that go? Was that grueling? Did you have to take it 8 times like John F. Kennedy Jr., or were you like just jumped in, passed it, and became a star attorney immediately?
Yeah, I want to say I just, did nothing and passed it, but that's not the truth. I worked hard. I studied a lot, a lot, but I did pass it on the first time. I passed the California bar at the first time. And everyone's
Nice.
always really impressed. But, when you love something and you want to do it and you see the value in it, and it's just one more thing, and another stupid test that doesn't really measure much other than discipline, and just sitting
Yes.
there knowing the material, being able to regurgitate it, going through the grueling, for us it was 2 days, but it was 3 days for those before us, 2-day test for me and those in my year, just being able to
Mhm.
complete the program and pass the bar and become an attorney, and that's where the real work starts, and that's where
Oh,
everything
that's such a
becomes
long test.
super meaningful. But yes, it's a
Oh
pretty
my
gruesome
goodness.
process.
2 days. Oh, people taking a 3-day test. God bless them. They must really
Yeah.
want to be attorneys. So, so you went into estate planning. You've been doing that for a few months now, estate planning law?
Yes, it's
Oh,
part of estate planning is part of, I would say, trust and estates
hmm.
area of the law, and it can go into various other issues of elder care and other tangential
Oh, of
areas of the
course.
law.
Of course. Yeah.
In
So
law
I have a,
school,
mhm. In
go
law
ahead.
school, what? No, no, tell me about it. Law
I
school.
was going to say, in law school, I spent a lot of my time doing public interest type work. And I did legal internships in immigration, refugee resettlement, human rights work, which focused on some issues in the Middle East. And then I spent a lot of time doing advocacy and research and on anti-human trafficking issues, which I still want to be involved in today and still want to pursue that. But what I
Excellent.
found that, like, the common themes in what I was doing was all about community. It was all community focused. It was all focused on people's freedom, their agency over their lives, their livelihood. And that's really what propelled me to do what I did every day in law school, because law school is not a fun time. And the legal internships are really where you, as a student, grow and apply your heart and soul into what you do. And so seeing the thread just kind of thinking today how I wanted to share this with you. Let's see the common themes of what I always worked on. And even people who knew me, they knew that I was always working on human rights issues or social political issues. And I wanted to pursue that and continue doing that as an attorney. But unfortunately, you find that there isn't much support or money in this type of work. It's not profitable. And secondhand trauma is like a huge part of doing nonprofit work and human rights work. And so is it something I can do for 40 years and leave a legacy that way? And so when I had my son, I was really eager to use my professional talents and go back to work, glorify God, and invest my time in something that mattered, and invest my energy into client advocacy that gave me that same satisfaction of working with the community, helping people advance their livelihood and giving them more agency over their lives. And thinking about estate planning brought everything home for me. It was an opportunity where I can work intimately with the community. It's super relational. There's nothing more relational, maybe family law. So there's nothing more relational than estate planning, because I have to know and analyze every small part of my client's life and be there for them as they grow, be there for them as they mourn, be there for them as they have questions and doubts and fears, and prepare for them a foundation for their future, and that legal foundation that will allow them to share their legacy, pass on their wealth to their loved ones, prepare for their end of life. So it's just this beautiful area of the law where conflict is not really what's steering everything, which I found to be the issue with other practices in the law. You're just thriving every day on conflict, people just being upset at each other.
Right. Well, I mean, it's such an adversarial situation. That's what the law is in some ways, right? It's this constant head-to-head battle. Whereas, how lovely to be there as someone's support and someone's helper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while I love the law, and I appreciate the adversarial nature of it, because we need a place outside of just being violent in the streets to take care of our matters. We need a courtroom where we can come together professionally in an adversarial system. But as much as I love that, I didn't want to do that every day. And I wanted to put my energy and my love and my identity. Being an Orthodox Christian, it's all about harmony and love and community, and it's all relational, and it's all about responsibility and stewardship. It's just like, how can I flip the switch and go to work and be conflict oriented? And I can do that, but is that really what I want to do? And at the end of the day, after I had my son, that question was answered for me, because no longer did I want to pursue that type of lifestyle. And then being a mom really opens you up to the world. And as much as people told me that, I didn't know what that meant until it happened. And here we are today. I'm open to the world, and I want to serve the world, and I want to be a part of the community and use every part of who I am, which is being an Orthodox Christian, in my profession, and letting that be everything in my life, and letting God work through that in ways that I can never have imagined he would want me to do. I'm ready for whatever he's ready for me.
Glory be to God. Isn't that beautiful? It is interesting because we can tell people, being a mother will change you, and you're just going to think about everything differently. And it's like every person around you could be your baby. It's like, you can't understand it. And what's interesting is I felt like I was a little bit afraid, like, I'm going to change into a different person. It's like, nope, you'll be more yourself than ever. Don't worry about it. But it is really neat. It's very beautiful to see. And I love that this is the direction where you took it. And, especially right now, I know you and I were talking earlier with the coronavirus and COVID-19, and there's a lot of anxiety just in the air. And I think for a lot of people, because I'm hearing that there's a surge in estate planning right now, how do you explain that? Like, what's going on? We're all concerned about coronavirus. Are we making our wills because we all think that we're going to die next week? Like, what's going
Oh,
on?
goodness. Lord have mercy.
I don't think that's it, right?
Yeah, I think in a way our human nature kicks in, and we're forced to social distance, we're forced to stay home. We have no control because of this invisible virus that could be anywhere at any time. And while we have the extra time to stay home and be with our family and reconnect, the world is slowing down for us, and time now is being used in ways to give us control. So how do we maintain more control? We plan. We take care of our affairs. We go through that drawer and file it because it's been there for a decade and we're too busy to look at it. But now we're pulling papers out of it and we're seeing that, oh goodness, we haven't updated our insurance, or oh goodness, we really need to write a will. Or we hear of horrific events in the news of other people losing family members, or even we've been subject to losing family members, or being exposed to the virus. In fact, in my own family, we have a lot of health issues, and tomorrow is not guaranteed. And that's how we Orthodox live. We are every day preparing for death. Spiritually, we're preparing for the next life. And that's how we ought to approach our daily life in remembrance of death. And that, of course, is a more hesychistic practice of dying to oneself. But if we take the more maybe earthly understanding of that, just being responsible, being loving to our family members, and preparing for when we leave this life, making sure that we leave the least amount of burden for them, and that we take care of our loved ones. And so people are thinking about family more often right now. They're with their loved ones in the hospital or praying for them. They're constantly thinking about their own mortality. And as much as we want to brush that away and not think about it, our society right now is forcing us to think about it. And as a result, I think our human nature propels us then to say, okay, I'm gonna do something about this, whether whether it's an act of love that I'm going to be responsible and take care of it, or out of necessity, so that if an emergency happens tomorrow, I'm prepared.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, it's true. We're reminded by this virus that it's important, but it's always important. It's always a critical thing that we should all be doing. As you mentioned the word stewardship, right? This is good stewardship of what God has given us, and to take care of our loved ones. But also, it's a way to have some control. I love that point, because we do have so much anxiety about what's going on, not just right now, but especially right now, perhaps. But what a beautiful thing for you to have found a profession where you can help people get some peace of mind and feel some control and enact their true desires. How beautiful.
Thank God. It really is a profound blessing in my life.
It truly is. Well, Noelle, it has been an absolute joy to get to know you. I thank you so much for coming on this program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure speaking to you as well and getting to know you.
Well, it was a delight. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Come back next Sunday night. We'll be meeting another Everyday Orthodox person. Good night. For joining us, and we are back in our Ancient Faith continues to be live with Father Evan Armitage with Orthodoxy Live. Father Evan, how are you?
Christ is risen. Hi, Lisa.
Truly, he is risen. Father, how was your Pascha?
Of course, like everybody, it was both beautiful and different in ways I couldn't necessarily have expected. I mean, good and bad, and beautiful and sad, and wonderful and challenging, right? All those things that we all went through. And but it was lovely in many ways, and I think so much good is coming out of it. I think we're all finding that, as God takes what's evil and he applies his grace and love, and we come together, to participate in that. So it's really been a beautiful season. I don't know. How about you?
It was a different Pascha, but it was Pascha. You could feel it. It felt like, and my girls and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, you know what? That felt like Pascha. Like that it was really lovely,
Yeah.
Quieter, different.
Yeah, I came out on that, agape vespers or after the vigil and that same indescribable joy and sense of freedom and liberation and courage and all those kind of like a Christmas morning, was there. Even though it was, like I said, just so different. I think as a priest, it was an exceptional challenge, but a good one. I mean, from the standpoint of, sharing the services and knowing the people were there in prayer, but not having them present, it's just a very different thing. And, St. John Chrysostom often spoke of his parishioners as people being his wings, that they really allowed his spirit to soar. And as a priest, that's so true. The liturgy is a work. It's a service. It's a joy, but it takes effort. And without the presence of the community, it's much harder. But I'd say that really settled in on me on Friday, with the Lamentations, and then through the first resurrection, and then of course the vigil. It was just kind of like, all right, Lord, this is just too weird.
Father, I think we felt the same way at home. It's sort of we come into church and it's the smell of the incense and you're there and everybody else is there. And you kind of fall into this place where you know that you're there worshiping and you're there with God. And when you're at home watching it and we're separated from the priest, it's the same sort of thing. It's so much more difficult and so much more effort to join it and feel a part of it and to really feel in it in the same way. But thank God, God provides and he gave us enough. We had enough Pascha that we will get through this year. And God willing, next year we'll all be together on Pascha like we're supposed to be.
Great to hear your voice. So. I'm glad that you and your family are well, and we'll chat soon, I hope.
I hope so, Father. Good luck tonight. Enjoy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Glory to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armitage, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Well, good evening and welcome to Orthodoxy Live, your live call-in show about the Orthodox faith, her teachings, and her traditions. I'm your host, Father Evan, and we're streaming to you live here, April 26, 2020, the Sunday of Thomas. I'm glad you're with us and look forward to hearing from you tonight. If you'd like to get into the program tonight, pretty easy to do. Just dial in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF Radio. You can also get to us by emailing your question to orthodoxylive@ancientfaith.com, or if it's a little bit easier for you to remember, you can use ask@ancientfaith.com. Of course, while we're off air, if you've got a question for us, you can always email those in. You can check out our Facebook page and post a question there, which several of you do. And you can also record a question. Some of you did that recently on ancientfaith.com. If you just go to the live programming, you'll find a microphone button under the Orthodoxy Live icon, and you can click on that and record a question. Of course, any of our past programs are available to you on podcasts. If you haven't subscribed or liked us or let other people know about the program, please do so. And if you can, I know it's difficult in these times of job loss and uncertainty. If you can continue support for Ancient Faith Radio, we certainly appreciate that as we continue to provide programming during this time. And I have to say, a couple weeks ago was the last time we were on air, and Palm Sunday and Pascha were two Sundays that we didn't come on air for obvious reasons. priests get fairly busy. And I would say, my own parish is a very busy and invigorating and wonderful parish to serve. But Holy Week adds quite a bit to that, even when you're streaming online. And so was not possible to broadcast, but we're back tonight. Glad you're with us. As I said, it's the Sunday of Thomas. And I have to say, in the interim, so many incredible stories, so many photos people have sent and emails and texts that they've shared about how they've turned their homes into house churches and the blessings that they received in doing so. And I would say, personally, it was kind of beautiful to tour the country. As I would finish services, I would often tune into services that either occurred after, on the West Coast, or I would tune into services that happened before on the East Coast, and I would check in on priests' parishes that I'm friends with or know, and listen to their homilies. It was just really kind of a beautiful thing, and I felt as if we kind of all came together in a beautiful way through those online services. Just so you know, we did take a little bit of a break in our parish with a lot of our online offerings on Bright Week, as most parishes slow down a bit. But starting this week, we'll be back with a number of live offerings. We'll be hosting a live service every Wednesday, and we'll rotate between Wednesday morning and Wednesday evening, this Wednesday being in the morning. And you can find that there's a link here on Ancient Faith Radio to our live services. You can also get to us at stspiridon.church. You can find us on YouTube. You can like us there. You can just live stream us. But we'll be doing that every Wednesday. And the Bible study that also is available here on Ancient Faith Radio, known as Transforming Our Lives in Christ, is something you can tune into live and with video or just audio or both. And you can do that by, again, just going to St. Spiridon's website and look at the online calendar. We broadcast our Bible study on Tuesdays, and you can join in if you're looking for another opportunity. We've got a number of youth events that happen for teens, college students, and youth. We've got a Saint Story Time on Tuesdays and Thursdays you can check out. And I'm also adding something on Thursdays, Lunch with Father Evan. I figured in the middle of your lunch break, you could tune in. I'll offer a short reflection, and we'll have a discussion on Thursdays at noon, Mountain Daylight Time, so you can check that out. We're going to go out to the phones, and I see that Steve is on the line. Welcome, Steve, to Ancient Faith Radio and Orthodoxy Live. Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen, Father Evan.
Steve,
usually I'm monitoring.
Go ahead.
Usually I'm monitoring the chat room, but it's good to hear your voice directly.
Well, Steve, it's nice to talk to you. Well, I think the last time we broadcast, there was a question that came in that we didn't quite get to, and you wanted to circle back to it. It was a couple of weeks ago. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, no, it's that exact question.
Tell me what that listener. Yeah, please.
Okay, well, that listener was concerned, especially during the COVID crisis. What would you do if somebody from the health department came by and was taking issue with you serving communion with a common spoon, which is what Orthodox do?
Yeah. I think some of that question, Steve, is obviously wrapped up in perhaps to some degree a misunderstanding by many outside of the church as to what exactly we're doing, what is our practice, what is our belief. Also, I guess a difference in practice between what is occurring in most Christian churches that practice Eucharist or Eucharistic assemblies. For example, I know even Roman Catholics at this point, the blood has for many years now been optional, even though they do believe it to be the actual blood of Christ. They serve, as we know, the wafer as the body and the blood, and it's not tinctured as we do. And I know that that's been optional for Catholics for a time because of concerns with health. In other Christian expressions and denominations, the Eucharist may be in an individual cup, plastic cup that's even sealed, things like that. Whereas we receive the Eucharist from a common cup, bread and wine, body and blood together out of a cup that is administered by a clergyman who's giving the Eucharist or to people receiving by the same spoon, right? And so I'm just describing that, Steve, because that that listener's question is, okay, what happens if the health department comes by and says, hey, you can't do this anymore? Well, I mean, I think besides the obvious answer that this is an infringement, right, on the rights of the church, the separation of church and state, there is this sort of liturgical or theological position of the church, which is that the Eucharist is not something that can make us ill, but standing in line in church can. Right. So what I think the church's response would be to say kindly, no. Well, we're going to remain in our practice. Now, of course, if the bishops direct us.
I was going to wonder. Yeah.
Yeah. If they direct us to offer the Eucharist in a different manner, this is not in some way a lessening of our belief that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ, or that the Eucharist is indeed the medicine of immortality, that it cannot sicken us. I mean, St. Paul does talk about it sickening us spiritually and even physically because we're ill-prepared to receive it, but not sickening us because there's a virus or a bacterium in the chalice. So if the bishops direct us, and if they say, we want you to administer the Eucharist in a different manner, okay, this would not be unprecedented or unusual. I mean, we currently tincture the Eucharist on Holy Thursday and dry it and put it in the tabernacle and reserve it in these small, what we call pearls, that are taken to the sick and the dying or the infirm and the shut-ins. And they often receive this in an unusual way, not as we would typically receive it in the church. And it's done because that's how we have, through, let's say, economy, or which is a theological word, an act of mercy. This is, how we've administered the sacrament to them. So I don't think we have to have some sort of concern that if the bishops gave us directives, but, we're not going to take, let's say, our direction from the health department. We're going to take it from the bishops who, to be fair, are listening to the health department. That's why they've refrained from keeping the churches open, right?
Right.
Because they're paying attention. But I don't know, Steve, what do you think?
No, I think I agree with all the things that you're saying. And the main thing, I would say, if the health department came by, I'd say, well, maybe talk to my bishop, but
right.
We have to keep,
I appreciate, Steve, you following up and sharing that with me, because it's something that I think a lot of people are asking, So, all right, Steve.
Thank you, Bob.
You bet. All right, take care. Thanks for calling.
You as well. Christ is risen.
Truly, he is risen indeed. Well, again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio. And if you'd like to get in tonight, we do have open lines, and you can dial in at 1-855-237-2346. We're going to pick up one of those questions that came in this past week from Kristen. She called in with a question, and let's take a listen to Kristen right now. Oh, are we queuing up there? I'm not sure if I went too quickly to that transition there, Bobby. But let's try that again. Let's take a listen to Kristen's call-in question. Doesn't sound like it's coming up. So, well, while they get that queued up, maybe there's a little bit of a technical difficulty. I'm not sure. Let's pull up one of the email questions that came in. And a lot of questions have come in about this COVID crisis and the church's response to it. One of the things that someone wanted to know about recently is receiving the Eucharist during the quarantine. And, it says, I know churches across the nation are dealing with this in different ways, and I'm respectful of the way that our priest has chosen to lead us during this difficult time. In our church, the Eucharist is not being offered to the congregation, but it is encouraged for us to consume holy water during the time of the Eucharist in the liturgy. Let me just stop there really quick and just say that, no priest has made the decision on their own to not offer the Eucharist. Rather, those directives came from the Council of canonical Orthodox bishops in America. In other words, no single parish sort of made a decision on what to do. Rather, we were directed by the bishops in America on how to proceed in terms of keeping the churches open and whether or not to offer the Eucharist. Just a little, not a correction, but an illumination on why your parish and my parish at this point is not offering the Eucharist in general to the faithful. So anyway, you've been directed at the time of the Eucharist to receive holy water. That's something that our own bishop has mentioned as well. It's something that we can do. We've got holy water in our homes, perhaps, and during the time of the Eucharist, we can receive that. As I've reminded my own people, just remember that, St. Mary of Egypt and many other saints received the Eucharist once or maybe only twice in their life. St. Mary, we know she only received it after her baptism and then before she passed from this life into the next, and kept that reception as a pledge unto eternal life, as a medicine of immortality. That's not normative, but it does happen. And so, we're all kind of existing in a very unusual circumstance. And even the monks of Mount Athos, we listen carefully to how they're reacting. Have cautioned that we listen to our bishops, that this is a time that we, out of love for humanity, stay home. But anyway, as you go on, my question is about the sanctification of the holy gifts for communion. During this time of home liturgy, couldn't one assume that gifts prepared at home could be sanctified during the liturgy and consumed as the body and blood of Christ? Isn't the prayerful request of the Holy Spirit to sanctify the gifts or even us available at all times? While I understand the sanctity of the priest's role in administering the sacraments, isn't it allowed in the Orthodox Church that a lay person baptize someone if there is no priest available and perhaps the hour of their death? Thanks so much for answering this question and all you do to feed us spiritually now and always. God bless. Vicky from Kansas City. Well, I think it's a stretch to move from the idea that we can administer as lay people the mystery of baptism in extreme circumstances to the idea that we could, as faithful in our homes, call down and ask for the sanctification of the Holy Spirit upon bread and wine and consume these gifts as the Eucharist. That doesn't have any let's say, liturgical, historical, or theological precedence in the church, whereas the other does. From the times of the early church, baptism did occur in extreme circumstances by laity, but never the Eucharist. That isn't to say there was not a time in which the Eucharist was consecrated and then shared with people in their homes and kept even in their homes. That did occur, but we didn't ever have a time in which people celebrated the liturgy and stood in the place of the priest during the time of the consecration. And I would say, there have been questions by eminent theologians about, watching the services online or through a television, and really, are they the same as being present? I think we all can align ourselves very quickly with such thoughts. It's not the same. It's an allowance. It's not even second best, maybe third or fourth best option in such a situation that we join in prayer with the liturgy while it's going on. But it's not the same as being in the church and the priest properly vested and ordained and placed by his bishop and celebrating the services with the laity and the servers and the altar and the chanters and all the rest, and celebrating the liturgy. I mean, that is the common work of the people, which results in the consecration of the gifts and the calling down of the Holy Spirit. So Vicky, I think that's probably, too much of a stretch. I've heard of such things occurring outside of Orthodoxy and arguments made for it. And to me, this strikes an improper balance between what the church is and what the church allows, and what the faithful need versus what the faithful may want to do. In other words, we do have a tradition in the church in which people receive the Eucharist, and then there's a time in which they do not, and they wait prayerfully to receive again. My focus on this whole point would be, I think, on an opposite position, which is, I think it is to the benefit of the faithful at this time. I say this respectfully, humbly, that the Eucharist is not something they're participating in, except, of course, in extreme circumstances. Our bishops have already made that clear. When someone's maybe ill and dying, there is allowance for the Eucharist to be brought. But, in terms of our absence from the Eucharist, I think it leads to a warming of our hearts, where we're challenged, let's say, in this time where the Eucharist is not readily available, to recall, the importance of it and how essential it is to our spiritual life and to our physical life on earth. One more thought. Historically speaking, there have been times in which the Eucharist was not readily available, whether that's under communism or the yoke of Islam, and the church did not go to the idea of the laity consecrating the gifts in their homes, but rather made allowance for and said, look, at least once a year or twice a year, the faithful should receive the Eucharist, and went to great lengths to make that a possibility. So Vicki, thanks for the question. It's an excellent one. All right. It looks like we've got that SpeakPipe question lined up. So let's take a listen to Kristen.
Good morning. My name is Kristen. I am from Houston, Texas. Our family has been attending liturgy since August, and we are in the process of becoming official catechumen. My question is, should we be staying home from liturgy right now? We have 3 young kids. We don't have any particular health issues to worry about, but seeing as how we're not receiving the Eucharist, should we just go ahead and stay home and do liturgy on the TV with one of the live broadcasts out there, or should we feel okay to go into our parish? Thank you for taking my question.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Kristen, you're welcome for the answer I'm about to give. And obviously, your question to some degree at this point is moot, because as we know, our bishops have asked the faithful to remain home and limited the number of people in the church, depending on the local bishop, as little as 3, as many as maybe 10, I've heard in some situations, but it seems like most places around 3 to 5, and the faithful are not attending services. But I think your question is still important because, as states and different areas of the world begin to lift the restrictions on people returning to church, the question's going to arise, should I attend? What is safe and prudent? What is a faithful response? I think one thing that is very important that's come out from, I think, just about every bishop I've seen is that not one of us is to judge another on the decisions they make or take regarding their attendance or reception of the sacraments. This is similar to Paul's admonition about fasting, where he tells people, mind your own business. It's before their own maker that they stand or fall. And who are we to judge another? For we're not the judge. God is the judge. So I would say, as restrictions are lifted, everybody's going to have to decide what is best, what is okay for them and their family to do. And, I'm not going to tell people to do one thing or another. I do look forward eagerly to the opening of our churches, and obviously to full churches. That's my hope. That's my desire. Of course, clergy are deeply pained by not having their faithful with them in their churches, right? And who wants the church to be filled more than usually the parish priest? At the same time, I have members of my community who are vulnerable, who were sparse in attendance because of their health in the first place. And of course, this makes it doubly hard for them. Now, I've got people who are anxious and uncertain. I have other people who are bold and courageous and who say, I think that there shouldn't be any restrictions. I mean, there's the wide gamut, right? To all of them, I continually say I'm going to follow the directives of my bishop. But in terms of, my own family and how we will navigate this space, that's a discussion my wife and I will have to have, and we'll have to consider what is best for us. I do think that if the churches reopen and if people are uncertain about attendance or even they're positive about, one thing for sure, and that is that I think if the Eucharist is offered, in our parish, when we were still offering the Eucharist just till a few weeks ago, we took great steps to ensure the safety of our people in terms of how we staged people and hand washing stations. And I think, that's something that I would encourage my family to do, is to receive the Eucharist, to come and receive. And those who are not yet baptized or chrismated or received into the faith, I encourage them to come at that time to receive a blessing, to enter into the church, to make the sign of the cross, to be in that sacred space. And so that's something I would encourage, Kristen, for you and your family to do when that time comes. And, we'll see what types of creative and innovative ways that we're going to be moving back into worship. I've had some priests, call and ask me, do you think we'll do outdoor liturgies? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, I don't know. My own bishop sent out a directive saying, this week we're going to receive some detailed instructions as the state of Colorado is trying to lessen its social distancing rules. I mean, I have to laugh about this because I gave a sermon, maybe a teaser. I won't tell you about the sermon, but you can go check it out on YouTube today, on this very topic of social distancing and how that's related to the gospel on the Sunday of Thomas. And Thomas was, I guess, one of the first who social distanced. He was not with the disciples at the time of the Lord's appearance. So take a listen to that sermon. While we're talking here, again, we do have open lines if you want to get in at 1-855-237-2346. But I do see, that's 1-855-AF Radio, that a Facebook Live question came in that said, Father Evan, would you say the existence and purpose of our lives is to be loved and become love? To everyone and all of creation. That came in from Nick. Nick, you're pushing a button that I often push, and that is, if I had some magic spiritual pills, I've always kind of joked that there would be 3 of them. One of the pills I would give people is to understand this very thing. It's probably the first pill I'd give them. I would put it this way, Nick, obviously, we proclaim and say this again and again to the point that perhaps we don't hear it anymore. And as one of my friends talked with me this past week about is, we start the Holy Week services with the services of the bridegroom. And, we have this concept, but it's a reality, that God comes to us as a bridegroom, which means he wants us as a groom wants his bride. And having been a groom and having had a bride, boy, that's a pretty intimate, deep longing, one that I still have, if you will, for my wife. And the idea of a bed room, a wedding chamber, the type of intimacy and vulnerability and nakedness that is required in such a setting is really mind-blowing. And Christ, our bridegroom, he desires us and wants us, and he loves us, and it's just unfathomable to a degree to think that God wants me. And he wants to have a relationship with me that's so tight, so real, so intimate, so constant, right? That he longs for me. Now, of course, as his bride, do I long for him? And so, the idea that God loves me and that I am to allow myself to be loved by God does have its opposite, which is that I am to love back. It's not just about receiving love. So yeah, our purpose of our life to be loved, but the purpose of our lives is, as you've kind of said in the statement, to love back. That makes us complete, and to love in the way that we understand that, to be free, to be sacrificial, to be dynamic, to be other focused, right? We put some definitions around what this word love means. And to extend that love to creation, of course. We love the earth, the trees, the animals, the harvest, the fish in the sea. Not in the same ways that we love God and love neighbor. But you see this very clearly in the spiritual tradition of the church, that as the church turns itself towards its creator in love and towards its creatures, women and men with love, it does the same with the way we treat materials and building. We don't become nature worshipers, but we certainly treat the world with respect and dignity. We're good stewards of it. So I like the question. I think it's one that we have to constantly re-explore, because we don't often think of it. And that's why Holy Week really poses this difficult term, bridegroom, and really contemplates and tries to enter into the mystery of that, right? Well, another question that came in from Facebook Live tonight is, how can I watch your live services? Well, pretty easily. You can subscribe on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, youtube.com, I think we all kind of know about YouTube, and you can search for us. If you go in the search bar and you just put Saint, so spell out SAINT, Spiridon Church, Loveland, Colorado. And as you type that into the search bar, boom, we come up right away, St. Spiridon Orthodox Church. And if you go there, you can subscribe. Boom, you subscribe, and then you can set up notifications, to get when we're broadcasting. The other way, there is a link on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm not exactly sure where they've posted those links on their website, but you can also just go to St. Spiridon, SAINT, Spiridon, SPYRIDON.church, and you'll see a media button. And on that media button, you can scroll down to live stream. And every one of our services coming up has a tile, so you can see when that next service is going to be. That's another way that you can get to us, okay? So thanks for the question. Well, as I'm sitting here in the studio, I got a question came in from ask@ancientfaith.com. Hi there, I'm an inquirer, and I'm really struggling with the church hospital barring its door right now in a time of need. Is there a historical precedent or scriptural precedent when I can buy alcohol and any number of things but can't worship God? It feels like the church is lacking faith. Why is Walmart safe, but the church views itself as unsafe and unessential? Great question. Lots of people have been asking that same question, have been asking it in different ways. Clergy have been asking it. Bishops have been asking it. Everybody's sort of scratching their heads and wondering around this question and what is the answer. And I think the response is the church says, no, we are essential. The church is an essential part of being human, for sure. And the church must be present. I mean, one of the things that I told my parish right away, especially its leadership and its ministry, is that if we're not present now, why would people want to be present with us after? And so, in many ways, we increased our ministry in this time. I mean, we have really poured our heart into ministry in so many ways, so many things going on. I mean, I have to say that, the time that we shut down in the state of Colorado was somewhere around the second week of March. That previous week was a busy week for me, I remember, around the first week of Lent. And from that point on, I think it was about March 7th, my first day off didn't come until Bright Monday. So what is that, 7 weeks or something like that, 6 weeks? I can't even counted up. And it was constant activity in my parish. We were present in people's lives constantly. Now, when we talk about being present in the liturgy and being present to the services and, Walmart, Home Depot, the liquor store, and how they're present in people's lives, obviously they're not the same thing. And the way that we worship in the church and the space that we worship in is much different than a grocery store or a big box store. Again, I'm not going to saddle up to the health debate, because I think people are raging on both sides of that. And my bishop gave us a directive in terms of how we're to operate along with all the other bishops in America. But one of the things I do know is that in the space of St. Spiridon, it would be near impossible for me to create a space where you could physically not be putting yourself in danger of catching the virus if someone was standing next to you with it. Both proximity, and the practice, as Archbishop Elpidiforos of the GOA said, look, nothing about the Eucharist will make you sick, and nothing about the church is tending towards sickness. But if we are standing shoulder to shoulder, as we would have been for sure in Holy Week, as we typically are, Palm Sunday, next to one another, and so many people are asymptomatic, it's my understanding as virologists and I can't say the word right now. You know what I'm trying to say. Epidemiologists, I guess I still didn't say it, have instructed us it isn't a safe thing to be standing next to one another. Now, of course, I think the church took an unprecedented step, let's say, in our lifetimes. But it's certainly been done in the past in different ways of refraining from offering the Eucharist to the general population. But this did happen in the pandemic of the Spanish flu pandemic. Churches closed. The Eucharist was not offered. It's happened at different times during the plagues. Now, I'm not a historian. And I'm also not a liturgics or canonical professor, so I don't have that depth of knowledge that they would. But I would say to you that the Church has often, in her time and in her place in history, adjusted its liturgical practices to meet the present need of the people. I'll give you a simple one. The services of Holy Week used to always take place in the morning for the most part. All these services that we do at night, those are morning services. Well, when did they switch? Well, about 150 years ago, I think, is about the time frame. They switched to the evening. Well, you might ask yourself why. I mean, they're supposed to be in the morning. Even my wife's pointed out several times. The prayers mention, our morning supplication, but we're doing it in the evening. Well, people work now in a way that they didn't work in the past, and the Church adjusted her liturgical schedule so that the people could participate in the Holy Week services. So on Sunday evening, we're doing the service that is for all time and place occurred on Monday morning. And on Monday evening, we're doing the service that occurred on Tuesday morning. And on Tuesday morning, we're doing the service that was on Tuesday afternoon. So you see this, we're off half a day. Right? And so the Church made an allowance for that reality of the modern working day so that people could attend. And right now it's making an allowance for this current health crisis. You can debate the merits of whether it's a real health crisis or not. That's not at all my ability or purpose, but rather it's to remain gentle and faithful and peaceful with the decisions our bishops have made, and know that we're still within the Church. I mean, in no way has the Church come apart. We know also that in times of Lent, it's been historical that monasteries would close and they would send the brothers or the sisters into the wilderness, the desert, to live a hermitic lifestyle. And so that's part of our tradition. This in no way destroys the rhythm or the liturgical life of the Church. In fact, I think it allows us a time to embrace and to draw near and to realize the importance. During war, during times of great social turmoil, I mean, parishes were not able to operate. This certainly has happened. Civil unrest, that's occurred where, if you think about during World War II, even when churches were bombed out and priests were rounded up, and how could you have services? They didn't happen. Or people were hiding out for fear of death and destruction. And so the church calmly and wisely found a way to keep the people under her wing, if you will. All right. So another question, and this one came in from YouTube. I'm not really sure. Maybe John will tell me how. I didn't know that questions come in from YouTube as well. But this came in right now. It said, how to speak to our Roman Catholic friends about the schism without argument. Boy, that is a big question. It's a question that I've received a number of different times and ways. I think a fair amount of triumphalism can creep into Orthodox talk, and it is completely it's not beneficial. It doesn't help, and often some historical inaccuracy can creep into our way of speaking about the schism. I think it's best when speaking about the schism that we work from common facts, clear facts about of what the schism was about, how it occurred. I think it's okay to describe our differences and how we approach what occurred. And what happened after post-schism. And I think, to have charity, I mean, I don't think it's very beneficial or helpful when talking about this to paint all things Roman Catholic negative and all things Orthodox as perfect and glorious. I think to accept the good and to acknowledge the good in the other, and to acknowledge our own misfortunes, yes, but also our own missteps, I think is beneficial, because, it doesn't do us any good to sort of present a false position and a false paradigm. I can stand shoulder to shoulder, face to face with my Roman Catholic brother or sister and explain to them without rancor and animosity why it is that I believe the fullness of the faith is found in Orthodoxy. And I've done it a number of times and not be offensive. And I can respect their position that they are the fullness of the faith. And I can accept their fervor and their piety, right, and their position. It doesn't mean that I agree. And I think, dialogue doesn't mean that we have to agree, but dialogue does mean that we have to go through our words and our reasoning to reach a common understanding. I think it's unfortunate when we often ask questions of our brothers and sisters that are really statements, or when we get into conversations presuming we have answers. The purpose of a conflict, I think, is positive. If we're open and respectful and curious, if we're accountable to our own position, our place for power, our own knowledge, it's often conflicts that bring us to a greater understanding of the other. But if we're in a position where we want to criticize or accuse or attack, then we put the other person in the defensive position. If we stereotype or show contempt, all they're going to do is shut down and we move further apart. And I don't see the point of that. But I think if we can be open, respectful, curious, accountable, as I said, and we can move through a dialogue that leads to a greater understanding, I mean, that's what we're after. That's what we want. We want to understand. We may not agree, And if we're looking for understanding, then the other side starts to look for understanding. And I've had people who've grown up in the Roman Catholic tradition who through that open dialogue have entered the Orthodox Church. I have others that have rejected it, and I know of Orthodox who've listened to the Roman Catholics and moved into the Roman Catholic Church. Now, again, as a priest of the Orthodox Church, I believe firmly with my heart that the fullness of the Church is found in Orthodoxy, the fullness of the faith. But that doesn't mean that I can't look critically upon Orthodoxy and critically upon Roman Catholic faith and doctrine and practice and see so many good things. I mean, here in America, or just close to my house, I mean, not only is there a university, Roman Catholic University, there's Roman Catholic charities, there are parishes that are vibrant and active. There's lots of good occurring, within Roman Catholicism that I can acknowledge. At the same time, often when Roman Catholics visit my parish, they see a fullness of liturgy and worship and dogma and personal practice, spiritual discipline that is missing in their own parishes, But anyway, so just a follow-up email from the listener who wrote in about the churches being closed and just saying Christ is risen. Thanks for the answer. You're very welcome, and hopefully we'll hear from you again soon. We're going to go back to another email that came in recently from James. And so James writes in, "Dear Father Evan, Christ is risen. For those of you who are perhaps new to the church or are inquiring, there are often greetings within the church, like when Christ's nativity is celebrated, we'll say Christ is born. And the response is glorify him. And when we are in the Paschal period after the celebration of the Lord's resurrection on Pascha or Easter, until Wednesday evening and the leave taking of Pascha, the Wednesday evening before the Ascension, 40 days later, it's traditional for the Orthodox to greet one another with the statement, Christ is risen, and then the response, truly is he is risen, or you might hear risen indeed, or truly the Lord is risen. I mean, there's different ways of phrasing that, but I think you get the gist of it. So thank you for hosting this podcast. It has been very helpful in my spiritual journey in the Orthodox faith. My family converted when I was only 5, and I have been Orthodox for about 20 years now, so that puts you about at 25, I guess. I love the Orthodox Church and loved growing up in it. I have been an altar server for as long as I can remember. I love the beauty of icons, the chanting, the style of worship, the incense, and so much more. However, I have always struggled with faith and doubt in the belief in God. Lately, it seems tough to believe in God after some time of struggle with the church and doubt. I'm curious to see if you have any thoughts on how we can be reassured God is real and present in our lives. Thank you for taking my question and the time to answer it in Christ. James, I guess, I didn't really read through this question before, when you sent it. I often don't have time. I get so many questions by email, and I just file them in a folder. But you asked this question, and here we are on the Sunday of Thomas, often called Doubting Thomas or Thomas the Twin, because he himself was in a position of uncertainty about whether or not the Lord was indeed risen from the dead. And as the passage we read this morning says, when the Lord appeared to the disciples in the upper room, he was not with them. That's not just simply a description of his physical location. Like, he was out getting groceries or getting water, or had to see someone about something. It's really a description of his spiritual, emotional, mental space. He's not with the disciples who saw the Lord. And, you may question, well, Father Evan, that seems like a stretch. Well, trust me, it's really not. It's a technical description as well as a physical description. He's just not with them in where they're at. And he returns, he's told that they've seen the Lord. He's incredulous. Look, unless I see him myself and even touch his body, the place where the spear went, the print of the nails, I'm not going to believe. And, given the course of the story and Thomas's uncertainty, you'd think that the Lord would just show up. Sort of like you, here you are struggling. How come the Lord doesn't just show up? And the text tells us it's 8 days later. And that is by no means a triviality. It's not just like, it could have been 12 days, 17 days, 4 days, but the Lord picked 8 days, or it could have been 15 minutes. No, it was 8 days for a reason. 8 days is the fullness of time, the amount of time Thomas needed. When someone's, doubting, I think, instead of maybe calling him Doubting Thomas, we could have called him Honest Thomas, because maybe Thomas was sharing what many around Jesus felt, and people who were sort of in the religious business, the spiritual business, is this stuff real? And I shared in my homily today, I've asked those same questions often, even Holy Week. I'm like, is this all real? What am I doing here? Is God real? Did he really send his son? Did God become incarnate? Did he die on the cross? Is he risen from the dead? All those doubts. Is there such thing as a virgin birth? Miracles, walking on water, all of it, right? And I've had those same doubts. And, I have, if you will, distanced myself from belief. I've walked with skepticism and uncertainty. And I think if I'm honest, like you're being honest in this email, that honesty does get a response. I think if we're pretending, it doesn't. And I think that, as the gospel obviously is read on the Sunday after Pascha, for Pete's sake, not only because that's when it occurred 8 days later, which is a perfect amount of time, the fulfillment of time, God's time, the amount of time Thomas needed to work out his own thoughts about the matter. That's when Jesus shows up. After he discusses this and sorts through it himself, Jesus then appears to him. And I think it's uncertain whether Thomas actually ends up touching Jesus. I think he comes to a place of belief without having to fulfill what he said. In a sense, his faith had already gotten there. And, of course, Jesus says, or the gospel tells us, Thomas saw and believed, and how great will the faith be of those who do not see and yet believe, which is speaking about us. In a sense, again, that gospel is for us. So I think it's okay to be honest. And I think it was okay for Thomas to be honest and to display his doubt and to work through it and to move through his uncertainty and his doubt, to reach out and wonder, God, will you show up in my life? And I shared this again in my homily. There are those moments, some of them big, most of them small, most of them, you would almost say inconsequential, where God has touched up against my life and provided a small amount of reassurance. But, it's interesting because, even in Jesus's time when he was on earth, people wanted a sign from him that this was all real, and he said, you sinful and adulterous generation, you seek for a sign, and none shall be given you except that of Jonah in the belly of the fish. And nobody saw Jonah in the belly of the fish. And so just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days, and then he'll rise again. And once again, nobody saw Jesus descend into Sheol or into Hades. Jesus is sort of playing with those who seek a sign and saying, you seek a sign, you're not going to get one. And the sign I'm going to give you, you can't even see. You're not even going to see this sign. I think Father Eugene Pentiuk of Holy Cross Seminary, a professor of Old Testament and in New Testament as well, for reminding me of that statement of Jesus and the import of it. Then in a sense, is a sign and a wonder needed? Maybe not. Maybe, I was talking this over with my deacon after one of my deacons, one of the deacons of our parish after church today. And I said, isn't it interesting to consider our doubt and our uncertainty of God's existence? And he, right away said, oh, totally. He said, Father, I doubt all the time. I'm uncertain all the time. He said, but if it's not true, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, if this whole thing is a hoax, then what is real? In a sense, what he was hinting at, and then he got to, was that, when I live in the church, I there's no loss, but rather there has been nothing but gain, as I see how my humanity has been formed and how I've been changed by my life in the church, that it becomes a proof positive, if you will, of God's real existence, as the elegance of God's church and his solution for humanity plays itself out, not only in what I read and see in the church, but what I experience, what's happened to me. I can say, in fact, without question, James, that, I'm more of a pragmatist and a practical Christian than I am a spiritual one. I'm not a mystic. But being that as it may, I can also say that my life has been indelibly changed for the better through my faith and life in Christ. I mean, who I am as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as a son, as a priest, all of that has been changed irrevocably and for the better. And that doesn't mean it's not a continual struggle. Now, I will say this, James, and feel free to follow up with the question, because it's an important one. You're not the only person asking it. Is that time and again, as I said, in large and small ways, God has come up and touched up against my life. And when my eyes have been opened for it, I've experienced wonders that I just never thought possible. And I was sharing with my parents my own uncertainties, and then the reassurances that I've received from God while serving in the altar. Things that wouldn't be beneficial for me to talk about, in a sense. That things that are, I guess, what God wanted me to experience, or ways in which working with parishioners or going about my business in my home, and things that have occurred that I just go, oh my. How would one explain such a reality, in the ways that God mysteriously moves providentially in one's life? Now, it's often a still, quiet thing, and not often something grandiose. Although I've seen that too. I mean, I really have. I've experienced things that go beyond description, and healings, and just things that it's hard to describe. But James, thanks for the question. Just a reminder to all of you that once again, we're going to have a number of things available to you this week in our parish. Of course, AFR is providing a ton of things for you as well. And I just want you to make sure that you're tuning in and supporting us if you can. And one last sharing with all of you, as it came in today from Gary and Stefania, Theodore and Marina. They write in, Ancient Faith Radio. At the moment, I don't have a question, but I wanted to express my great appreciation for AFR. A year ago tomorrow, Holy Saturday 2019, my wife and I were received in the church. Of our 3+ years of inquiring and catechumenate, shows on AFR like this one, Orthodoxy Live, Faith Encouraged Live, and other programming were huge in our learning and experience of the Orthodox Christian faith. I will continue to pray for and provide support for AFR when I can. Thank you, Gary and Stefania. Well, that's just so true. So many people who have benefited now and through the years from the programming here in Ancient Faith Radio, and found their way into a home parish and have journeyed into the church. Biggest mistake I think in my time with EFR has been I haven't saved those stories, those journey stories. I've received hundreds of them, and so many people who've said, this program or other programs, just AFR in general, how much it's meant to them. And what a beautiful thing that is, that this program and others have provided spiritual nourishment and continue to do so even now when we're all in a sense, locked away in our own homes. Well, take a listen again next week as we'll be back on air, and of course through the week as we have live programming still available and all the podcasts that's here. And visit the store, get yourself a new book to read in this Paschal season. We thank you for supporting us, for listening, for sending in your questions. Thanks to our studio team back in Chesterton for all their hard work. For Orthodoxy Live and Ancient Faith Radio, I'm Father Evan. Good night and God bless.